Welcome to the Orlando Sentinel Editorial Board interview with candidates for State House District 39. It covers Orange and Seminole County, including Apopka and several communities around there. The incumbent is Doug Bankson. He's a pastor and a former Apopka City Commission member who is wrapping up his first term in the legislature. He is being challenged by Marsha Summersill, who spent 18 years working in child protective services and now practices family law. And we are going to go ahead and spend about 40 minutes talking to these candidates about their priorities and give you a chance to hear what they have to say. And I'm going to start with our first question, which is about the only job that Florida legislatures actually have to do. And that's write a budget. Florida has had 3+ years of record spending, thanks in large part to that massive infusion of federal money that came in the wake of the COVID pandemic. Over the next 2 years, however, state economist Amy Baker has said that Florida could go from a $2 billion surplus to a $2.9 billion shortfall. What should legislators do in the coming year to start dealing with that reality? And let's start with Representative Bankson.
All right. Well, thank you so much. Thank you to the board. We really appreciate you giving us this opportunity. And, of course, our thoughts are also with everyone who's just gone through Hurricane Helene, all those on the coast especially, our thoughts and prayers there. But thank you for the question. Having been there these last 2 years, you're exactly right. We have had a tremendous influx. The bottom line is we are the #1 economy in the nation. And part of that has been because we've been open for business. But we won't see that continue. That's going to begin to wane, just like the tide is beginning to go back out. And so one of the last things that I did, having served in the city of Apopka for 6 years as a commissioner and vice mayor, was I made sure that we had a policy to have a reserve, a healthy reserve, because you have to look at the things that can happen that you don't plan on happening, such as our storms. And it's the same at the state level. Last year, as we closed up, they really began to speak to us. We saw the chart, as you're referring, that if we don't do something, if we continue the present level of spending, that we would end up going into a negative place. So they already told us, don't count these last 2 years as the norm. In fact, we really have had an abundance and was able to bring back $15 million, that able to get across the governor's desk back to the district, a lot of that for Lake Apopka and restoration. And so they've said to us, one of the main things you need to do is look to other sources. So I would say probably the most important thing to do is continue to develop the relationships together. It's one of the things I've sought to do as in office, is to go to each of the municipalities in the district, find out what are their key priorities. And the state has said, if you can find resources any other place, go there first. The other thing that they've required is that we make sure that there's a buy-in. In other words, each project that's there, they want to see at least 50% on the table, that there's skin in the game, and that they're willing to match that. I had some projects, including for some affordable housing, that I thought were going to get across the finish line, and they didn't. But the bottom line is, as we partner together, as we look for all the resources and we begin to do the public-private partnership in every measure, it gives us the best opportunity to make sure that we don't overspend. I know that is our plan going forward, is to begin to cut back to make sure that we don't go below that center line.
Thank you so much. Ms. Summersill.
Yes, as with all budgeting, since now we're going to have to be facing a less influx of income due to not receiving the money that was given to the state prior, you have to be sensible with your spending. So a lot of the areas where government, particularly in our state, has provided incentives for organizations, I think it's extremely cautious and reasonable to limit that type of spending. It's also important to look at what our actual resources are as far as the income resource. And we also have to be very careful to ensure that we hit the areas that are vital to the state functioning as well as it is. So we have to look at the industries particular to infrastructure. We have a large influx of development coming in. We need to be realistic on what we're doing with those developers. What types of things are we requiring from those developers to ensure that we protect not only the state, the income that's needed, the infrastructure that's needed, and accountability on these guys. So there needs to be very logical review of these types of things. I think that there's been a happy period with the excess of income that has been coming in. I think that it's more realistic to be very frugal with the budget as well. Now, I've worked in areas that have suffered quite a bit when the state has had to make cuts in social services. I think that those areas obviously should maintain that budget, and we need to be realistic. Working with local government is obviously ideal. Working with the industries that are responsible for keeping our state in this situation that it's in now is also ideal as well. Bringing in experts to ensure that we support the structure in place to continue the success of our state, in addition to limited the spending to ensure that we don't find ourselves in a situation where we do have a negative outcome or that we're in the red.
Thank you very much. I typically, you both answered the question that I would typically ask next about local projects. So what I'd like to do instead is ask both of you to let us know, are there any areas where Florida could get more revenue that they're not tapping right now that could help feed the bottom line? I know we talk about the spending side a lot, but the revenue side is also an issue. So if you could give us your ideas on that, we'll start with Ms. Summersill.
Yes. I know that agriculture is one of the main industries for the state of Florida. Tourism is also one of the main industries for the state of Florida. We're actually also a good trade and port because we are obviously a good area for us to have incoming trade as well. I think that ensuring that we foster the growth of those industries is ideal. We have a very fortunate situation that we don't have a state income tax. And my goal in office would be to ensure that that stays in place. Obviously, I would be impacted pretty significantly if we were to impose something of that nature. So looking at what we can do to foster those industries to ensure they have the proper resources, they have the staff, they have the growth development, and that they also have the plans that are not going to be negative to our state, but that's going to be positive to our state. Ensuring that these guys have their needs met, but also ensuring that we protect the consumers and we protect the citizens of our state. That is the critical balance that is needed. But those are the major income sources for the state. Also, the piece of bringing down more experts in these fields, ensuring that we have the education resources, the training resources for these industries in order to foster the growth and also improve individuals that are actively working in that industry. If we have good pay rates, if we have good benefits, if we have companies that have positive environments, that's really going to continue that growth and maintain the ability for those industries to keep fostering the finances that we need to run our state. So I think that having that balance in there is critical, thinking outside the box, working with experts in those areas, and ensuring that we have those resources in place will ensure that our state will continue to prosper.
Thank you so much. Representative Bankson, what are your ideas on adding revenue?
Yes, thank you. Again, I agree that those industries are very specific to us, especially in Central Florida, but all over the state. We need to protect our farm industry. And when everything else goes down, people still need to eat. I've been endorsed by them as well as the CFHLA, which is a huge employer here in Central Florida, and protecting those jobs is very key. Another area, being a pilot myself, I've always had that interest in aviation, but in the aviation and aerospace industries, there's some tremendous opportunity here. We need to look at where technology is going in the future because we want our kids to have jobs when we are done. We see this advent of AI and how it's very rapidly coming forward. I have had a bill last year. I literally had it at the finish line, but there was a change in the Senate version. And after working for a year with all of the industry from California, Joby, all the way to Velicopter in Germany and meeting with these different ones, the bottom line is they loved the legislation that I had put forward because to me, government has to make a way, not get in the way. So I went to the industry to say, what do you need? I want Florida to be the world leader in AAM technology and opportunities. And so to bring those jobs here, the more jobs, we have an influx of people moving to Florida because of our economic freedom. And we want to make sure there are jobs to support them. So working there, that's something that they're very excited. I got to do the ribbon cutting for the first unit up in Tallahassee for the charging unit there for these vertical takeoff and landing vehicles that are electric charged, but also the space industry. I'm working on something right now with them, dealing with a captive insurance product that can bring these launches to the state of Florida. Whether we realize it or not, many of these launches happen in Europe. Of course, they happen in Texas, different places. So creating the economic environment for things to thrive. You can grow oranges in Alaska if you create the right environment. You have a greenhouse there. And so making sure that we don't have over-regulation that hinders them, and working with these industries that create the jobs that help all of our citizens to succeed.
Thank you for that. I wanted to ask you both about Medicaid. Do you see a path for Florida to expand Medicaid to cover low-income working families, and what strategies would you consider to be the most effective? And we'll start on that with Representative Bankson.
Thank you. Yes, this is such a challenge, from the federal level right on down. This is an agreement with the American people, and so we need to uphold that. The Social Security that people are depending upon supports them in these latter years, in the latter years of their lives, and we have to have the medical help and the Medicaid product to help support that. It's quite a challenge. Again, when we look at the challenges, knowing we're going forward in the budget, we need to make sure that we're working together with all the partners in the medical industry. I'm concerned when I see things that, there's such a huge markup, and we need to have some oversight and make sure that this markup doesn't end up costing everyone in the long run. So working together in that, making sure that we have a path to partner with all of the doctors and hospitals and the pharmaceuticals, making sure that pharmaceuticals, again, are not literally raising those prices when they don't have to be. I think if we look at a world market concerning some of these things as well, there are certain things that we can gather from across different borders to help look at what is the standard for our medical prices for our pharmaceuticals. Right now, it's an extreme markup here in the United States, and we need to see that brought down. So working together, again, with something that helps business to thrive, but also brings those prices that make them affordable so that it doesn't overburden the system.
Thank you. Ms. Summersill, what are your thoughts?
This is obviously an extremely personal issue to me. My brother was on private insurance, had to be transferred to Medicaid because of his chronic illness. The care declined and he died. I had the privilege of speaking directly with hospital administration, with ICU medical directors, everybody involved in multiple medical facilities, not just one hospital. And it's very obvious that the failure to adhere and pull down the Medicaid money has a direct impact on the citizens of this state. There's a lot of us that aren't covered. There's over 2 million people with no insurance, and there's a significant number with only partial coverage. And if they're in a long-term situation, they're going to have to revert to Medicaid. I would find a way to pull down the money. Now, before, the reasoning was they didn't want to match the money, or they didn't want to put in any state dollars to coincide with what the feds were going to provide. We have the resources to do it. The citizens are important in our state. They deserve health care, and I would make every effort to ensure that they have those options to have Medicaid there. We have a large aging population. Medicare is a different source of funding. Medicaid is also something that supplements funding. So it is imperative that we have the proper resources for our citizens to have good health coverage. I myself was out of pocket over $36,000, and I am fully covered. So I don't know, very little individuals, not very many of us have those types of resources. If I had to go on Medicaid for that, there's a likelihood I would not get the treatment because there was no resources in Florida for it. And a child protection person, a majority of the children that came in my care or in the care that I had to direct them to somebody else, we had no sources. We had no resources. They did not get the care. So what I would do is I would protect the citizens of this state, pull down the money, and do what's in their best interest. It's imperative that we do that.
Thank you for that. I'll take the next question. Would you be willing to support or file legislation that would give counties greater discretion in the use of tourist development taxes? And we'll start with Ms. Summersill.
I think there is a what if situation. I would require more information and more boundaries on what we're doing with that particular tax as far as providing the counties more leeway. If the county is significantly supported by that tax or contributes a significant portion, obviously Orange County is probably one of them, towards that particular tax, then they may have a proportionate view that would be required so they can have some leeway on that particular spending. I'm aware that there's some sub-agencies that would prefer some spending outside of the regulated areas particular to the tourism tax. Whether or not that's appropriate, we have to handle that individually on those particular requests in those cases. I'm a little hesitant to do anything global or a generalized adjustment until we have better terms specific to what the use is for as far as the tourism tax. The counties do have the direct knowledge of what their citizens need. They also have the direct knowledge of how that tax is going to be improved because they're the resources of that tax. But there are a lot of counties who don't have that direct knowledge, who are not getting that resources. So we don't want to favor too much in one part of Florida than another part of Florida. So I'm a little hesitant on doing a generalized regulation, providing counties more leeway. I do think that there's some justification for that as long as we have proper boundaries in place. And whether or not the use is something that's going to benefit the tourism industry or something directly related to the tourism industry, because the way the laws are written now, it is something that provides those barriers in place. Some flexibility may be needed. So that would be the answer for that particular question.
Thank you. Mr. Bankson?
Yes, thank you. This is something that is so interesting to me. When we deal with taxes, the bottom line is we need to make sure that we're using the tax for what we have told the taxpayer it's for. It's a tourist development tax, and it has parameters that are set. And part of the problem is we've seen this happen, unfortunately, in government. When there's a need, there's that tendency to rob Peter to pay Paul. And before you know it, we're taxing for one thing, but we're really using it for something else. So I think we've got to be very careful when we take a tax that has set parameters and begin to try and expand those parameters. We actually dealt with this in Ways and Means Committee, and there's an intention to look into this to see, has this tax reached a place where we need to redevelop it, look back, has it fulfilled its original purpose? And so there is room to go back and look at those things and make sure that, first of all, that we're doing what we said we'd do with it. But then if there are other needs and it's been fulfilled, such as our roadways, there's the frustration, we have a new toll and that road seems to be done, but the toll never goes away. If it's being used for its purpose, then we're being honest with the Floridian people, with our taxpayers. And that to me is the key importance here. If we say it's one thing, don't use it for something else. Let's keep it focused, but let's make sure, and if that is utilized correctly and finished, then we can look at, revisit that. And if we're going to do something different, we need to be very clear to the taxpayers. We need to label it correctly and make sure the parameters cover that.
Thank you so much. And I wanted to ask a couple questions about something that I know both of you are very much interested in, and that is education. In the past, the legislature has made up for shortfalls in the education budget by raising local property taxes, and then claiming credit for the education funding increase and leaving city and county officials to answer for the increase. What do you think the state should be doing to ensure adequate funding for public education in Florida? Representative Bankson?
Yes, I'm so excited that we have the opportunities that we have now. The bottom line is education is always about the student. We need to make sure that those opportunities match the student and that everyone, whether rich or poor, that they're not simply locked into one scenario and hinders them from finding their potential. We need to make sure that parents are in the driver's seat. At the same time, we have a responsibility by the state of Florida, by the mandate to create healthy and strong and funded public education. And so one of the things what we have done in these last 2 years is we've actually increased the funding. It's a record historic amount I believe the 2 years together is 55.2, that may be off a little bit, $1 billion into the K through 12 system. We've raised the pay for teachers, another 2.35 billion. And we need to make sure that we are funding that. The challenge has been, of course, the economy and the inflation, and much of that is dealt with at the level at Washington. So we have to be ready to pivot with those things. We have to keep it a priority. We have to prioritize our teachers, and I'm committed to do that and make sure not just the new hires, but those who have been in the trenches and teaching. Again, my grandmother, a lifelong educator, put that love in my heart for education, and it is the key to our kids' futures. And so making sure that we have the opportunities that each one, not just the university route, but also the trade schools. We've created many opportunities to do just that. And so by working together, there's a difference between the tuition side and the infrastructure side. That infrastructure, as you stated, is dealt with in our property taxes. And so finding that balance, making sure that we keep it on the priority, again, our state constitution mandating that. So we really don't have another option. You have to put first things first. We have safety, we have infrastructure, and we have education.
Thank you. Ms. Summersill.
Florida has the lowest paid teachers. We also have significant shortages. We've got underfunded county school systems. Listening to Seminole County Public Schools, meeting and listening to the Orange County Public Schools, both are going to be in dire straits because of not having sufficient funds that's going to meet the next fiscal years. They did lose a lot of the federal funding. The issues that I see that our state legislation is not addressing is that instead of supplementing the funding for public school systems, they tend to have a pattern of offsetting the funding. Even though we're seeing a significant influx of more students, more residents, we don't have the proper structures in place. We have a lot of schools that require repair. We have a lot of overcrowding. We have not enough staffing, and we also don't have enough of the programs to support the fostering of the growth of the students. So I would actually prioritize the funding for the public school system. I think it's imperative that we have the proper resources for our staff, the proper resources for our teachers. It is obviously a big impact on the sustainability of our state if we're not producing individuals that are able to enter the workforce. So it is an extremely important tool. I do know that when the schools are able to receive some type of supplemental funding, that the offsetting has put them back in the hole. So it is imperative that we don't offset funding for our public school system. We supplement that funding. We ensure that they have all the resources that they need and that our teachers are paid accordingly. The raises were pretty minuscule and they were extremely late, and we lost a significant amount of staff. So I think being proactive is the ideal situation, and ensuring that our schools are funded is #1 priority on my list.
Thank you so much. And I just wanted to ask both of you to address this issue briefly. Florida is sending billions of dollars now into its voucher programs, which cover a range of different needs, but recently expanded to basically any child whose parents want to seek a voucher that would allow them to attend private schools using state funds. However, the state does not do a lot to control how these schools provide this education. And I know Representative Bankson, you had touched on this before, but I'd like to start with Ms. Summersill and get a brief idea of what you think the state should do to ensure that all students, including ones who are accepting vouchers, get the same basic required level of quality education.
The curriculum in place, if that's what you're referencing, on whether or not the voucher schools should be required to follow curriculums in place through the public school system, I think at a minimum that curriculum should always be met. whether or not they have supplemental educational courses within these schools that are voucher or charter related, can be specific to that need. For example, a STEM school, a medical magnet school, schools that produce electricians, schools that produce more blue collar workers that are critical to the function of this state. I think that those types of things are always a positive aspect as long as the funding is controlled and as long as the money is very clear as to what it is supporting. I am someone who likes to know exactly what you're spending the money on, how you're spending the money, and I would love an outcome derivative for all schools that are receiving voucher money. It needs to show what type of goals that they're achieving, whether or not they met the curriculum that the public school system has in place, in addition to whatever their particular areas that they have applied for to become a charter school. All those measurements are met as well. Now, I do know that sometimes the statistics can be a little bit swayed because these guys have a small number of students and they can show a good successful period. However, as long as you meet the criteria for what's in that area and your student population is not going to be able to give me a clear derivative, then they need to find other measurement tools to ensure that they are using the money properly. Now, I'm a divorced attorney. I do know that charter schools have their place. I know that parents sometimes need options because using what's in their jurisdiction is too far apart. So there are some positive aspects, and there are STEM schools that are producing some great candidates. So as long as we have accountability and that our public schools are funded accordingly, then the programs should be sufficient in place.
Representative Bankson.
Yes, again, I think we've had a tremendous success when it comes to our opportunities, our school choice opportunities. And we've really seen an across the board lift from that. We've gone from, at one point, number 34 in our scores to number 1. And that's across the board. There's been talk that, well, this is diminishing the resources available to the public schools. However, it's actually helped to alleviate the burden. The bottom line is, where does the money come from? It comes from the people, and the children belong to the people. So allowing them to make those choices, it's also been given the impression that, well, these schools are underperforming. Well, the bottom line is every parent has the ability to check those schools. Many of them overperform when it comes to the standards. And so we need to trust the parents with their children and with that opportunity. It is their money and these are their students. That being said, again, as we go forward, I think the metrics are there. This money doesn't go to the schools. It goes to the parent through a clearinghouse that oversees that with stringent regulation on that. There's the concern, well, are the standards still there? Again, many of the private institutions, these different ones, actually exceed the standards, and the test scores prove those things. But when school choice was first implemented, we began to see this in Southern Florida, in the Miami-Dade school district, that the grades in the public schools began to rise, that the truancy rate went down, the dropout rate went down. So it's been a net positive across the board. And the opportunity then, again, having this choice, it means that every student, wherever they're at in the economic spectrum, is no longer stuck into a specific school, but they can find a magnet school that fits their child and their interests. When a child has interest, they stay involved and they're more successful. So across the board, we've seen this. It's been very successful, and we need to make sure that we keep that opportunity, let parents be in that driver's seat, and make sure that the kids have the best path forward for success.
I'll ask the next question. It's going to be about state parks. So the governor's office was revealed to be working directly with the Department of Environmental Protection to build hotels, golf courses, pickleball, and disc golf courses with little public notice and study as to the environmental damage they could cause. Only the public's outcry made them backtrack. Did you oppose this? What legislation would you suggest to ensure that doesn't happen again? And we'll start with Mr. Bankson.
Yes, thank you. I think this is one we could almost both handle together, because I know that's both of us would agree in this. This did take us by surprise. As a legislator, I found out through the news. And so I'm thinking, well, Department of Environmental Protection, I was just kind of shocked at this. The bottom line is this: we must protect our state parks for various reasons, not just because of the natural beauty. Again, we have several golf courses that could use help being revived without taking those public lands. Though the intent, I think, was good to try and get people out of their houses and out into nature. If you pave paradise to put up the parking lot, as the old song says, you've lost the very essence of that nature. So from the aesthetic value of that, we need to protect this, because last time I checked, God's not making any more land. It's there, and we have to protect what we have. We have to protect the wildlife corridor. This is something that's very important to Central Floridians, but I believe all Floridians, and make sure that they have that ability to thrive, and that we still have something for our children to enjoy. But I think one of the most important reasons is having our watershed. I was born in Southern California, and one of the grave mistakes that California made early on is not protecting their water supply. So they've had to play catch up and deal with that in many different ways. What we have here in Florida is the opportunity to stay ahead of that. And where we have these pristine lands, then all of that is able to collect and bring down to the aquifer the water that we need to be sustained. As we have people moving into the area, we cannot encroach upon those lands, because then we literally have the opposite effect: more people and less ability to supply that with our water supply. So I think all of those things are reason to protect that. I very much against that and would stand in any measure that we would need to. There was legislation that was suggested possibly open the door to that. 100% Democrat and Republican supported that legislation and had no idea or intent for that to open towards our state parks, and it would not see the light of day.
Thank you. Ms. Summersill?
The actual procedures in place that would enable one particular branch of our state government to override the protections or the processes in order to develop a state park need to be reinstated, reinforced, or significantly more powerful. The fact that we relied on a whistleblower to give us that information was enough for me to say this is a problem. Now, we all want to protect our state. We all want to protect the environment, and the water issue is a problem. I am aware there is a study by the EDR indicating that Florida is going to start having some issues in 2025, that we're going to have significant issues in the next 25 to 30 years with being potable water. So having development on the actual land that is pretty much responsible, or what's left over, to ensure we have fresh water for use, personal use, and for our agricultural industry is just one factor that we need to focus on. The fact is that we have a little bit of overdevelopment, as we're quite aware. We have significant annexing for more development. We are not properly ensuring that regulation and proper infrastructure is in place to prevent more damage to our environment right now. So it was alarming that we were getting this information from someone, and thank goodness that this individual did that, because I'm not sure what would have happened if we didn't get that alarm sent off to us. But it's our position, and it is our responsibility that we address it, that we put those particular provisions in place to prevent anyone from any branch of our government from ever stepping on the toes of protecting our environment. And that's what I would do.
Thank you very much. I wanted to ask you very quickly if you could give us your position on Amendment 3, which would legalize marijuana for personal use without a need to get medical authorization. Ms. Summersill, we'll start with you.
I do think that there is a good thing with that, as long as we have proper regulation. Obviously, I have extensive experience in the world of addiction. I've worked with families that had to deal with that pretty extensively. And there's also the concern of how it would impact everyday life of some people driving on the roads. We already have laws in place to address driving under the influence. We already have laws in place to address improper use of substances, whether they're legal or illegal. We would have to ensure that we have those with enough teeth in them to ensure that we protect the citizens around us. The other issue is ensuring that it's not done in a public kind of setting. This is not just like cigarette smoke. This is something that's going to impact individuals in certain settings. So in order for this to be a productive passing of Amendment 3, we have to have proper regulation. I know that there's several other states that already have this in place. We need to review what those states have in place, and also what has not been appropriate or sufficient enough to address the concerns that I just previously noted. So I do think it's a good thing, a positive thing, if, only if proper regulation is in place. And that's why you need the correct legislator in office. I think that individuals that have knowledge, that have experience, that have the ability to ensure that we do look outside the box, that we cover those areas, that we ensure that proper regulation is in place, that these things are done in the cohesiveness and collaboration and corroborating the amendment itself. So we need to be sure that we have the proper provisions in place, especially if the citizens of this state indicate that they do want to pass Amendment 3. So the citizens will be making that decision, but it's the legislator that really needs to ensure that we really make sure that we have the protections in place. So that's my position on that one.
Thank you for that, Mr. Bankson. What are your thoughts?
Yes, this is a Trojan horse that will be terrible for the state of Florida. This is big industry, big marijuana, just like big tobacco years ago. Interesting. I don't know if it was this morning. I just read the article this morning that former Health and Human Services Director Donna Shalala, who was also a legislator in Washington, is now the president in Miami University, just wrote an article about this. There's a great resource that I encourage everyone to go and read, and it's called Learn About SAM, SAM.org. SAM stands for Smart Approaches to Marijuana. And this is something that's a bipartisan effort nationwide. When you look at what's truly happening, there are things that are basically being put out there. $83 million by TruLeaf out of Canada has been put into this effort, because when you have an amendment to the Constitution, it puts it beyond just what my opponent was saying there. We need to have the right regulation. I actually supported a bill last time that would put a limit on those levels to make sure that there was safety there. It didn't end up making it all the way through. But the bottom line is, if we have an amendment without properly being vetted, we lose the opportunity to regulate those things in a safe and healthy way. You look at the statistics nationwide and what's happening. They're lying about the resources they're producing. Again, those who are even for the recreational use. The bottom line is, big marijuana has designed this to literally shut out the mom and pop. They won't have the ability to do what they believe they have. So this sounds like liberty to those who want to go that route, but it actually will tie their hands as well. So across the board, as Donna Shalala wrote in that article, this would be a disaster, both for those who would support it and those who are against it. I think this is the wrong approach when it comes to making sure that as the people do speak and begin to move forward, number one, that we're not lied to online by big industry, putting millions of dollars in, and that we approach it in a healthy manner. Just a few more statistics. In Colorado, 1 in 4 tragic automobile accidents are attributed to marijuana use. There's so much more. Go to learnaboutsam.org and find out more. It's so important.
Thank you. And then we're also going to ask you for your position on Amendment 4, which is meant to protect reproductive rights, including abortion access for Florida women. And if it passes, do you anticipate further limits on reproductive freedom from the legislature? Start with Mr. Bankson.
Yeah, thank you again. And the same approach, we have to understand what an amendment to the Constitution does. It actually removes safeguards that were across the board agreed upon. Even those who believe that there should be greater measure than is presently available for opportunities towards abortion, it will remove all of those. Literally, the way that it's stated, this was a 3-4 vote at the Supreme Court that it lost because it's presented in a very vague way that is confusing to people. The 3 that voted against it were all 3 women Supreme Court justices, because they know that this actually, again, it seems like something that will answer different desires across the board. It actually hinders any reasonable limitations to that have been supported on both sides of the aisle. So for me, it's a wrong approach. I do believe in a culture of life. I believe we need to protect life. That's what the Hippocratic Oath is to do no harm. We need to make sure to protect all women, including the unborn, and make sure that there are right now the exceptions. And you see commercials that say there are no exceptions. That's just not true. And so this is not the way to deal with it. An amendment will bring it out of the reach, beyond the reach of legislators to come back in and have this conversation. And it literally stops the voice of Floridians. It sounds like one thing, but again, it's producing another. And I think it's a dangerous way to approach it.
Ms. Summersill, what is your take on Amendment 4?
I support Amendment 4. I think that it codifies Roe v. Wade. I think the language is very specific, and also a 4-3 is called a majority. So the majority of the legal experts felt that the language in the amendment was more than appropriate, and it met the criteria in order for it to be added on as a change to our Constitution. The alleged provisions that are in place for the stated exceptions, those are concerning, to say the least. Obviously, as a child abuse expert, I've dealt with young women, and I've dealt with women who have been horrifically abused. Now, when I sit there and tell them, well, you're past the 6-week mark, you're going to have to sit in front of a board to determine if they feel that your abuse is enough to allow you to make the decision of what to do with your body. That is a firm no. I worked very hard to advocate for victims, and I am not subjecting them to a panel of individuals who are going to require them to go through something in order to justify a medical procedure. The government does not need to be in between a doctor and that patient. I think that the doctor and the patient are the best people to make that decision. I know that there are concerns that this is used as some type of contraception or in that nature. No, contraception prevents pregnancy. So the reality is we are not qualified. We don't know what's going on in women's lives. It is absolutely inappropriate for us to sit down and require a woman to tell me her sexual history so I can determine whether or not I can judge her behavior and what's in her best interest. So it is, in my opinion, that amendment should pass. If the state of Florida, if the citizens pass it, if I'm elected in office, then I will ensure that the wants of the citizens of this state are enforced and that that law has been codified appropriately based on what the people have voted in our state.
Thank you so much. We have so much more that we could talk about, but we are already way over the time that we promised we'd have you done. I did want to sneak in one more question that we just have to ask you after the events of the past few days. Florida residents pay more for, and in many cases get less from, their property insurance policies. And there are a lot of people right now who are very scared because they have seen their number one asset go underwater and they don't know what kind of coverage they're going to get. Lawmakers have gone back to Tallahassee repeatedly to try to fix this. That from the consumer standpoint, there has not really been a fix. So I would like to ask both of you, what does Florida legislature have to do to get property insurance fixed for consumers? And we'll start with Ms. Summersill.
I actually did a little bit more research on what was already done to address this particular issue. And what I'm noticing is that the legislator focused quite a bit on the provider. Why are you raising your rates? What can we do to help you out? Is there anything we can supplement you for? Is there anything we can do to ensure that your company is going to succeed? What they seem to lack is looking at the homeowners. You know, how much is this impacting you? What does your mortgage statement look like? Why is your escrow triple what your actual mortgage is? I personally was impacted by this. I went from $2,200 to $8,800 within an 18-month period from one provider who, unfortunately, I had to go on Citizens. Now that is a very big concern for me. So I think what we need to do is, I looked at other states. I know that other states obviously are impacted as well. Instead of the one-part process of what can I do to make the provider feel better, we need to see what we can do to ensure that we're not doing an all-encompassing increase on all homeowners within the state of Florida. They are not all high risk, bottom line. For a provider to sit there and say the entire state is going to be susceptible to my 200% increase, my 50% increase without proper information provided to the OIR is unacceptable to me. I think that our regulation is prove to me that you're going insolvent and therefore you have my permission to raise your rates is insufficient. I think it's imperative that we look at all aspects that impact the market and that we are able to focus, because your job is to focus on the benefits of the citizens of this state, not benefits that's going to ensure corporation has a percentage of profits. So I think that that's one of the areas that I would look into. I've also met with experts in the field to look at ideas to ensure that we have ways to control rates, that we have supplemental areas to assist them. So that's the main areas that I would look at to ensure that we aid the homeowner and not just the provider. I think we can do both.
Thank you so much. Representative Bankson, you've been to those special sessions, so give us your idea on what you think should happen.
Yes, thank you. And I wish we had more time to discuss this. We actually did approach this from a broad, comprehensive basis. Literally after the last election, we had special session, jumped right into the deep end of the pool. And yes, we had to look at all of the different things that are driving our insurance rates. The number one reason was because of litigation factors. We had 8% of the claims and 80% of the litigation. So we did address this. The fact of the matter is, when we are driving this industry out of the state, then there is no competition to help bring this back. We have to have a market-based solution, but that's not the only thing that we did. Secondarily, we stopped the assignment of benefits where there were roofers. The second issue, again, I'm not trashing any industry. We need attorneys, we need roofers, we need insurance companies. But the bottom line is, when there are bad actors, we have to close those loopholes. And there were those taking the assignment of benefits from people and getting roof replacements that weren't warranted for that to happen. And so making sure that that loophole was closed. Then we also made sure that there was oversight. We increased the ability for Office of Insurance Regulation, that if insurers were not playing fair, if they were undervaluing things, that was one of the things that I went to those who crafted this legislation when I was up there and said, well, wait a minute, if they're not there, what keeps the insurance company from just not covering these things or undercovering them? And the regulation that we gave them, if there was less than a 12% standard, they had to increase that. But then the other thing that we did was form the My Safe Florida Home Act. And this is grant money for the homeowners, that the bottom line, that if there's anything that they would do to strengthen their home against storms, they could replace storm windows, they could replace roof clips and different things that help to strengthen it against hurricanes, against wind events. And there's grant money to help pay for the inspection. If they got the inspection and they took it to their insurer, we passed the law, they have to lower their rates. And there was tremendous savings with different ones that accomplished those things. There's so much more that we did. That's one of the main reasons I went up there, was to try and fight against that. I personally was affected as well. And that's something that I pledge to continue to do, to bring those down. There's 10 new companies coming back into the state, just to say that. So that's some good news.
Thank you so much. We are in just a minute going to ask you both to make closing statements. I would wish we had more time, because there's so much else we'd love to talk about. But first, I wanted to remind our viewers that the Sentinel will be making an endorsement in this race, but we don't expect you to just take our word for it. There is so much information out there, starting with both candidates having very responsive social media and very informative websites. In addition, both of them have been attending community forums, so you have a chance to meet them in person. And of course, ultimately, there will also be our excellent news coverage of this race. So you've got plenty of opportunities to take a look at them for yourselves. And we hope that you do that and pick the candidate that best represents your values and your priorities for the state and for your community. Most importantly, of course, is to remember that you're running out of time to register to vote in this election. That registration closes in about, I believe, 11 days, and that you, on or before November 5th, you have to remember to cast your vote. So we really urge people to do that. And now let's hear from our candidates and their closing statements. Ms. Summersill, if you could start with giving us a brief pitch as to why voters should choose you, and then we'll move to Representative Bankson.
Thank you. Well, I am actually a native Floridian. I am a third generational Floridian. I graduated from Apopka High School, and I'm someone who grew up very poor. You know, I've always had to live under a certain budget. I've always had to work a full-time job. I paid cash for my undergrad. I had to work full-time while I went to law school. And I also obviously excelled in the field of child abuse. And I ran one of the most successful teams in the state of Florida on the limited budget that we were provided. So I think that I really understand the needs of our state. And what compelled me to run was my brother. My brother got critically ill, and this was the Medicaid question that you guys posed to me earlier. And during that process, I really learned what happened and why there was no money for Ray's care. And as a result, unfortunately, Ray died at the age of 45 years old in March of 2023. 2 months after my brother died, I got my home insurance premium. It went up in 2022 from $2,200 to $4,400. After the special session in 2023, my bill went up again from Progressive Insurance from $4,400 to $8,800. And I also deal with family law. My clients are struggling. I think that the work that needs to be done needs to be focused on the middle class, on the people who are struggling, on the people who need the support. We need to improve our funding for our education. We need to improve our infrastructure. It is imperative that we have proper things in place for our budget and that we are careful when we are balancing the needs of businesses and the needs of the citizens of our state. We cannot lose sight of what's important. Florida will only succeed when our citizens succeed. And that's why I'm running, is to ensure to address the issues that impacted me, that impacted my brother, and that impacts all of us. So thank you so much. I really appreciate the opportunity to interview with you guys today.
Thank you as well. And then we will ask Representative Bankson to wrap us up.
All right. Thank you so much, Jay, Chris, Julie. We appreciate this opportunity because it really is about the people. I love being a representative because it is a reflection. We are going to Tallahassee to take the needs of this area and present them there. We also make decisions that affect 22 million people of this state. And so I take these things very seriously. For me, I'm a pastor, as you stated. I'm also a pilot. I'm a police chaplain, but my favorite title is Papa. Married for 37 years. I have 4 grown children that I love dearly, and but 3 grandchildren and 2 more on the way that I would just give my life for. And everyone, to me, family is so key. That's why everything that we do matters. The average family is struggling. We see the Washington politics. One of the reasons that I ran the gold and silver bill is to make sure to alleviate the tax burden on those who would try and support their foundation, their portfolio of gold and silver savings, and remove the capital gains tax. Again, creating opportunities for our children going forward. This is one of the reasons that, again, I'm running with the vertiports bill. But I was able to get 10 bills across the finish line as a sponsor or prime co-sponsor. And 2 of those were law enforcement bills. I just sat down again with our Orange County Sheriff and Seminole County Sheriff, who have both endorsed me and have said, what are the priorities? That's what I do. What is the priority for our district? I work hard to go up there because that's what this job takes, and that's what I'm willing to do. The bottom line is we are the #1 economy, and yet we can't rest on our laurels. We have to look forward. Being a pastor means being a public servant. That puts that gear in me. I don't like what's happened to the term politician, because we're supposed to serve the people that we represent. Being a pilot, I'm an instrument-rated pilot. You have to think down the road. You have to make decisions long before you arrive. And so that forward thinking can help us moving forward in our economy, in our education, in our energy, and making sure to take care of the things that we value the most. And so for me, I think that the things, my core values, really move me forward to represent the heart of the people. I'm willing to go back to work and continue to get the job done. I would appreciate that support on Election Day. Thank you so much again for this great opportunity.
Thank you both, and we wish you both the best of luck.